Hello, welcome to Dylan reads a creepypasta called Squidward Suicide that is really bad and it's from like a decade ago. Got not do an intro, so let's begin. I just want to start off by saying, if you want an answer at the end, prepare to be disappointed. There just isn't one, because the story is complete garbage. I was an intern at Nickelodeon Studios for a year in 2005 for my degree in animation. It wasn't paid, of course. Most internships aren't, but it did have some perks beyond education. To adults, it might not seem like a big one, but most kids at the time would shit themselves over it. Now, since I worked directly with the editors and animators, yeah, sure, I got to view the new episodes before they aired. I'll get right to it without giving too many unnecessary details. They had very recently made the SpongeBob movie, and the entire staff was somewhat sapped of creativity, so it took them longer to start up the season. And almost everyone left. But the delay lasted longer for more upsetting reasons. There was a problem with the Series 4. You mean Season 4? With the Season 4 premiere, that had everyone and everything back for several months. Me and two other interns were in the editing room, along with the lead animators and sound editors for the final cut, even though I'm pretty sure that's not what interns do. But how the hell should I know? We received a copy that was supposed to be Fear of a Krabby Patty and gathered around the screen to watch. Now, given that isn't the final yet animations, I can't speak today. Now, given that isn't final yet, animators often put up a mock title card, sort of an inside joke for us with phony, oftentimes lewd titles, such as How Sex Doesn't Work instead of Rockabye Bible, When SpongeBob and Patrick Adopt a Sea Scallop. Nothing particularly funny, but work-related chuckles. So when we saw the title card Squidward Suicide, we didn't think it much more than a morbid joke, and we can't spell for shit. One of the interns did a small throat laugh at it. The happy-go-lucky music plays as it is normal. The story begins with Squidward practicing his clarinet, hitting a few sour notes like normal. We hear SpongeBob laughing outside, and Squidward stops, yelling at him to keep it down as he has a concert that night and needs to practice. SpongeBob says okay and goes to see Sandy with Patrick. The bubble splash screen comes up, and we see the ending of Squidward's concert. This is where things begin to seem off, and that's not how you set fear in a story. While playing, a few frames repeat themselves, but the sound doesn't at this point sound as synced up with the animation, so yes, that's not common. But when he stops playing, the sound finishes as if the skip never happened. There is slight murmuring in the crowd before they begin to boo him. Not normal cartoon booing that is common in the show, but you could clearly hear malice in it. Squidward's in full frame and looks visibly afraid. The shot goes to the crowd with SpongeBob in center frame, and he too is booing, very much unlike him. That isn't the oddest thing, though. What is odd is that everyone had hyper-realistic eyes. Very detailed. Clearly not shots of real people's eyes, but something a bit more real than CGI. The pupils were red, some of us looked at each other, obviously confused, but since we weren't the writers, we didn't question its appeal to children yet. You have a brain. Use it. Or you don't. The shot goes to Squidward sitting on the edge of his bed, looking very forlorn. The view out of his porthole window is of a night sky, so it isn't very long after the concert. The unsettling part of this one is that there's no sound. Literally no sound. Not even the feedback from the speakers in the room. It's as if the speakers were turned off. The stash showed them working perfectly. He just sat there, blinking, in the silence for about half a minute. Then he started to sob softly. He put his hands, tentacles, over his eyes and cried quietly for a full minute more. All the while, the sound in the background is very slowly growing from nothing to barely audible. It sounded like a slight breeze through a forest. The screen begins slowly begins to zoom in on his face. By slow, I mean it's only noticeable if you look at the shots 10 seconds apart side by side. His sobbing gets louder, more are full of hurt and anger. The screen then twitches a bit, as if it twists in on itself, for a split second, then back to normal. The wind through the trees sound gets slowly louder and more severe, as if a storm is brewing somewhere. The eerie part is the sound, and Squidward's sobbing sounded real, as if the sound wasn't coming from the speakers, but as if the speakers were holes, the sound was coming through from the other side. Sure. As good as a sound as the studios likes to have, they don't purchase the equipment to be that good to produce sound of that quality. Below the sound of wind and sobbing, very faint, something sounded like laughing. It came at odd intervals and never lasted more than a second, so you had a hard time pinning it. We watched this show twice, so pardon me if things sound too specific, but I've had time to think about them. After 30 seconds of this, I stopped watching. The screen blurred and twitched violently, and something flashed over the screen, as if a single frame was replaced. The lead animation editor paused and rewound frame by frame. What we saw was horrible. It was a still photo of a dead child. Yeah, no. I'm just gonna skip all of this. Yeah, no. The screen flipped back to Squidward, still sobbing, louder than before and half body and frame. There was now what appeared to be blood running down his face from his eyes. The blood was also done in a hyper-realistic style, as if you touched it, you'd get blood on your fingers. The wind sounded now as if were that of a gale blowing through the forest. There were even snapping sounds of branches, the laughing, a deep baritone, lasting, and at longer intervals and coming more frequently. After about 20 seconds, the screen again twisted and showed a single frame photo. The editor was reluctant to go back, but we all were. But he knew he had to. This time the photo was that of what appeared to be a little girl, no older than the first child. She was, yeah, hell no. About 5 seconds after the second photo played, Squidward went silent, as did all sound, like it was when the scene started. He put his tentacles down on his eyes, and his eyes were now done in hyper-realism like the others were at the beginning of this episode. They were bleeding, bloodshot, and pulsating. He just stared at the screen, as if watching the viewer. After about 10 seconds, he started sobbing, this time not covering his eyes. The sound was piercing and loud, and most fear-inducing of all, his sobbing was mixed with screams. Boo! Tears and blood were dripping down his face at a heavy rate. The wind sound came back, and so did the deep voice laughing. And this time, the still photo lasted for a good 5 frames. Stop. The lead sound editor told us to stop. He had to call on the creator to see this. Mr. Hillenberg arrived within 15 minutes. He was confused as to why he was called down there, so the editor just continued the episode. Once a few frames were shown, all screaming, and all sound again stopped. Squidward was just staring at the viewer, full frame on his face. It is for about 3 seconds. The shot quickly panned out, and Emperor Palpatine said, "Do it." And we see in Squidward's hands a shotgun. He immediately puts the gun in his mouth and pulls the trigger, like I wish I could do after reading this. Realistic blood and brain matter splatters the wall behind him and his bed, and he flies back with force. The last 5 seconds of the episode show his body on the bed, on his side, one eye dangling on what's left of his head above the floor, staring blankly at it. Then the episode ends. Mr. Hillenberg is obviously angry at this. He demanded to know what the hell was going on. Most people left the room at this point, so it was just a handful of us to watch it again. Viewing the episode twice only served to imprint the entirety of it in my mind and caused me horrible nightmares. I'm sorry I stayed. The only theory we could have was the file was edited by someone in a chain from a drawing studio to here. The CTO was called to analyze what happened. The analysis of the file did show it was edited over by new material. However, the timestamp of it was a mere 24 seconds before we began viewing it. All equipment was examined for foreign software and hardware as well as glitches, as if the timestamp may have been glitched and showed at the wrong time, which it might be reasonable, or you're all just idiots. But everything checked out fine. We don't know what happened, and to this day, nobody does. There was an investigation due to the nature of the photos, but nothing came of it. No child scene was identified, and no clues were gathered from the data involved, nor physical clues in the photos. I never believed in unexplainable phenomena before, but now that I have something happen and can't prove anything beyond anecdotal evidence, I think twice about things. God, I'm done. Wow, that was pretty short for a creepypasta like this. And it's especially because a few days ago I read Godzilla NES, and that was my entire afternoon. But yeah, this was really bad. So yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Yeah, I don't know how to end shit.